We all love dogs. Some of us, not all of us. Some of us have actually been bitten by dogs, including me. When I was about 10 years old, a dog bit me, and it was extremely painful. But regardless of what you think of dogs, there's no denying that dogs are man's best friend. In fact, they're probably believed to be the first animals to be domesticated, right next to goats. I don't know how that came to be. I mean, I don't know how goats. I thought some other animal would be domesticated first, but not dog. I mean, not goats. But yeah, dogs have been around humans for a really, really long time. And to be precise, scientists with some fancy dancy tools have determined that dogs were first domesticated by humans at about 23,000 years ago, somewhere in Siberia. For those who don't know Siberia, it's a region in just north of Russia. It's actually in Russia, but it's northern parts of Russia. And so back then, and this was back during the last glacial maximus. And the last glacial maximus, basically what that means, that's when the glaciers, it's kind of like the ice age, right? When there was the most glaciers, the peak glaciers in the world, there was just so many. I mean, pretty much the Earth back then was just so cold, and so this is when humans and wolves, which were actually the descendants of dogs, actually started having a symbiotic relationship. But how did this come? How did this come to be? Because we all know wolves are not friendly. You know, you can't really walk to a wolf and be like, and pet it and be like, hey, you want to be my dog, or like tie it up on a leash. No, you can't do that. Wolves are wild. Wolves are they're very wolves. They're very wild. I mean, they're just wild. I mean, I don't know. There's no way to simplify that. But how did we tame such a wild animal? Well, it turns out that wolves, so at that time, we humans had developed tools. So we had much better tools. So we could hunt a lot better. We could hunt bigger game. And so we could hunt bigger game like mammoths and, I don't know, buffaloes and whatnot. And so some wolves started to notice this because whenever we hunted bigger game and we couldn't finish it, some of them would come around and, whenever there was something that was left behind after slaughtering, some of them would just start eating them. And so most of them started hanging around humans a lot more than they were hanging around other wolves. And so, humans started to take note of this. And one thing about wolves is that they have much better sensory. They can hear better. They can see better at night. So they also humans started to notice that wolves could actually warn them of danger whenever there was like a big, maybe a pack of lions or hyenas. Wolves could actually warn everyone else, and so some humans actually started to take note of this, and they were like, this wolves are actually not that bad. Maybe we could start taming some of them and keeping them around. And the more they stayed with wolves, the more they started to realize that those wolves are actually pretty cool. I mean, they're actually more of an advantage than not. And so over time, wolves started to just become more and more friendlier and more tame towards humans, the more they stayed along with them. So much so that some humans began using wolves, or at least the earlier dogs, as a harness to pull things. I don't know if you've ever seen those things in the Arctic circles. I mean, have you ever seen the wolves that pull humans? And they're like donkeys, like horses. They put like a carriage behind them, and there's like a pack of wolves, and they just pull stuff. I don't know what that is called, but apparently that was one of the first users of wolves, while they were still wolves and turning into dogs. And actually, the first species, the species that actually dogs came from, at least according to scientists with their fancy dancy tools. At first, they thought it was gray wolves, but that was what the first scientists actually figured out. But then some other scientists with even cooler and more fancier tools came to figure out that the modern dog is actually came from a different species of wolves, and that wolf is actually extinct. I don't know why it's extinct. Maybe all of them just became domesticated and just became dogs. I don't know. It's unclear, but I mean that's just kind of how evolutionary sciences is. I mean, it's just some species just disappear, and you can't really explain where they went. Like Neanderthals, our cousin species. I don't know where they went. I mean, scientists think they interbred with us until they disappeared, but it's unclear. But anyway, how did wolves go from being wolves to being chihuahuas? I mean, that's another interesting view, right? Because chihuahuas are really tiny, and wolves are really huge and mean, and yeah, and they can survive in the wild by their own. Chihuahuas can't really survive much if humans disappear. But you know what? Funny enough, I think chihuahuas would have a really good chance of surviving if humans ever disappeared. Unlike dogs like golden retrievers. Oh my god. You know, one thing I usually just think of myself, if humans just disappeared right now, I think golden retrievers would be the first species of dogs to die off. They're just too friendly and too, I don't know, jolly and hyper social. And I think golden retrievers could probably, they'd probably get in with by coyotes pretty fast. Unlike chihuahuas. Chihuahuas are really small but very harsh and very mean. And I think that's a good survival instinct. They're also small, and being small also means that you're less likely to be hunted by bigger prey, bigger predators, because you know they just don't. Yeah. Anyway, back to dogs. So yeah, over time, over thousands and thousands of years, I mean, they just started becoming more and more, less like dogs, and less like wolves and more like dogs, until what we have right now, which is just the regular dog. I mean, they're just dogs. They don't do much. I mean, right now there's not a lot of uses for dogs. It's like horses. Horses, like a long time ago, horses were the main means of transport, and it was like that for a really long time. For like from like the Romans to the Assyrians to like cowboys. I mean, horses were very versatile and very useful. But right now, horses are just used for games. I mean, it's very few horses that are just used for like horse racing. They don't pull stuff anymore. I mean, we evolved. We built cars, and we built railways, and we built planes, and so we don't have any uses for horses. Same thing with dogs. Right now, the only use for dogs is just to be cute, to just lay around the house. And that's why we have chihuahuas. People have started selectively breeding them, and like there's a lot of inbreeding and selective breeding to produce you know, breeds of dogs that were just not necessarily useful, but just visually appealing. Because some people like hairy dogs, and some people like smaller dogs like Chihuahua. They're not really, and that's why they're called dog breeds. They're not called dog species. They're called dog breeds because humans, it's actually artificial. They're created artificially. Dogs, a different species means they're actually created naturally through natural selection. That takes a longer time, but dogs are just dog breeds. But yeah, it's been interesting learning about dogs, man. Dogs, I don't know. I wouldn't own a dog. I mean, here in America, owning a dog is a very different thing than in Africa. And that's why a lot of Africans who move from Africa to America, they don't keep dogs. Because dogs are just too much in America. They're not pets. They're more like kids, believe it or not. You gotta take them to the vet. You gotta feed them dog food. In Africa, you just feed them whatever remains after dinner. But here, you gotta go to what's some of that store, Petco or whatever, and buy them dog food. And you gotta take them to the vet every now and then. You gotta exercise them. Like you literally gotta take your dog for a run every now and then. You also gotta keep them in your house, which African people tend to not do that. I mean, we prefer to have dogs outside, and that's how dogs in Africa are. Now, speaking of Africa, how did dogs arrive in Africa? That's an interesting question, right? Because dogs, like I said, dogs actually got domesticated in Central Asia, in the region of Siberia. And so we Africans didn't get dogs up until 6,000 years ago, 5,000, 6,000 years ago. That's when dogs actually arrived in Africa. We were very late to the game. And this is not actually because of us, okay? It's not because Africans don't know how to tame dogs. It's actually because in Africa, you have some species of dogs, like wild dogs, which are they're just not tameable. They're very wild. Think of it like this, right? Think of zebras. and horses, and what's the other one? Zebras, horses, and donkeys. They're all very similar genetically, but you can only tame horses and donkeys because zebras are just not tameable. They're so wild. If you try to pet them, if you try to put something on their back, they just bite you and kick you. Unlike horses, which are more, you can more, they're more agreeable. They can still kick you and they can still bite you. But zebras are just too extreme. That's kind of the reason why we Africans didn't have dogs for a really long time. We had to wait for dogs to move from Central Asia with other populations of humans to move slowly south towards the Nile Delta, and up until 1,000 years ago is when actually dogs arrived in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's when we actually had access to dogs. Took a long time, but yeah, at least we got them. And another thing is that I don't know if you've ever noticed, right? But there's a huge difference between dogs in the developed world and dogs in poorer countries. And it's not a coincidence, and it's not an accident, right? For all Africans or for all Kenyans, I want you to just close your eyes and just imagine what kind of dog comes into your mind when you just think of a dog, okay? It's not the German Shepherd. It's not the Husky. It's that dog with brown fur and it's just and black the black nose. Like that dog, nobody even knows what kind of dog that is. People tend to not know what kind of dog that is, but it's actually a breed of dog called Basenjis, right? And that's kind of like the ancient dog. Most other dogs, like German Shepherds and Chihuahuas and Huskies, those are actually selectively bred. But the African, the Basenji, which is oftenly found in like Asia, found in Africa, and found in, you can even find them in the Middle East. And some of them actually in America. When I was in Saley one time, those like all kinds of dogs, and I couldn't help but notice that Saley's in Arizona, by the way. I couldn't help but notice that this dog looked like African dogs, and so these were actually the OG dogs, the Basenji dogs, the regular common dog, and yeah, dogs. And there's actually a lot of things to talk about dogs, but one interesting thing is that dogs. Not all dogs are becoming more domesticated. I don't know if you've all heard about the have you all heard about the Dole? I believe that's in let's see, that's in Australia, right? The Dole. It's actually a species a species of dogs that are actually becoming more and more wild. Did I say that right? Is it the Dolly or the what's now that South Africa Australian dog? Yeah, the dingo. Oh, not the dolly. I apologize. The dolly. I think I saw the dolly on Far Cry 3. That's why I confused it. But the dingo. So the dingo is a very interesting species of dogs because of one thing. It's actually evolving towards back being wild, right? It was actually up until 4,000 years ago. So the dingo, it's still a dog. It hasn't really separated with dogs. It's still the same species. It's still a dog species, but it might not be a dog species for a long time. But anyway, the dingo arrived in Australia about 4,000 years ago with other humans, but they just got off to the wild and they just start surviving with themselves. Maybe they want to go back to being wolves. Maybe it's a make dog wolves again revolution going on with the dingo. But it's a very interesting species, breed of dogs that's actually becoming more and more wild, unlike most dogs which are becoming more and more tame and more domesticated. But yeah, that's kind of like the short history about dogs, man. And obviously we know dogs have had a very huge cultural impact, right? Like even the ancient Egypts, some of them have been observed to be buried with them. Some dogs have been mummified with people, which shows that for a really long time we've seen dogs as our buddies, as our friend, as our they've had a higher. They've just been really close to us for a really long time. Anyway, that wraps up my little talk on dogs. I hope you all enjoyed it. Keep in mind that all my episodes are now on YouTube. Search it on Leon L3OIN L3ONN. And before I leave, there's obviously going to be a shout out. I see there's a comment here by Onesimus. How you doing, Onesimus? Nice to see you. But anyway, where's my phone? Because I got to shout out a few people here. Thank you very much to Moses Bet. Moses has been a good friend of mine for a long time. I bet. Thank you to Lynn Chuchir. Thank you to Godwill Kiplagat, all the way from, I know Godwill from Kapsabet High School. All those are people who liked my previous video. That's all you got to do for a shout out. Thank you to Kevin Johnson, all the way from New Mexico. Good friend of mine. Thank you to Millie Kimayo. Thank you to Deno KE, also known as Kipla. Thank you to Rotich. How you doing, Rotich, Mr. Tony? And too. Thank you to Gloria Chelimo. Wonderful Gloria Chilimo. Thank you to CC Tirop. CC Tirop. Cisse. How many Cisse? Could be Cisse Tirop. Thank you to Chuchir Meshak. Where are you from, Chuchir Meshak? I don't know if you come up with US or Canada, but thank you very much. And last but not least, thank you to Chero. Thank you everybody. Anyway, that kind of wraps up my episode for today. I hope you all liked it. This episode is going to be on YouTube in a few minutes. Till next time, peace.